Okay, go for it.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Excited to jump into meeting 19 of our Energy Code Board. Um, and just want to say a big thank you to those of you who spent a lot of back and forth emails with me or sent a lot of back and forth emails with me this week, just dialing in the proposals for today's meeting. So I appreciate you all taking the time to make sure we were dialed in today. So we'll go ahead and get started here. So the objectives for our meeting today are to really wrap up all of the discussions on changes we want to make to the model electric ready code. We're going to start today by talking through a couple of residential items that we did not get to at the last meeting, and then move to the ones about the commercial requirements. So that's what we're driving towards today. Our agenda, we'll start with approving the meeting minutes from last meeting. We'll again then move to the residential EV ready and solar ready proposals we didn't get to last time. We had one proposal come in from a board member related to some language in chapter 1 of the model electric and solar ready code. So we'll cover that next. And then we'll go through the commercial electric ready, EV ready, and then solar ready proposals. We will see how far we get. We may end up with a couple lingering proposals that we can tackle at our next meeting. And then we'll wrap up right around 11:30. So Adam, let me know, and it sounds like a couple of you guys have to drop around 11. So no worries on that. I think the one thing that I just wanted to note is if we lose a quorum, we may need to halt all business items until we can get a quorum back. So we'll see how many folks drop at 11 and if we can continue, but that's the only thing I wanted to note as far as moving forward today. Just our recurring reminder to please make sure you're checking public comments. I send these out with the agenda every time. If there are new comments you want to take a look at and integrate into our conversation, please make sure you're doing that. Alrighty, so we'll move next to approving the meeting minutes from meeting 18. And Tim reviewed these and actually sent us a couple of quick corrections. Thanks, Tim, for your review and for sending these over. So we would need the board to vote to approve the meeting 18 minutes with these corrections. So for those meeting 18 minutes, looking at page 16, there was a mistype, I guess, of the word acceptable. We accidentally included accessible when it was meant to say acceptable. So that would be one change we would want to make. The second change came on page 17. The comment was electric tankless water heater standard size is going to require 4 2-pole breakers. If you go up, it will take possibly 6 2-pole breakers. And those that was again just a mistype on our end. So those would be the two things we would want to change. Yeah, I think those were the two major flags. So if a board member would like to motion to approve the meeting minutes, I would just ask that you motion to approve the meeting minutes with these changes if folks agree.
I'll move to approve with the changes.
I'll second.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Ron. All in favor of approving the meeting 18 minutes with these changes, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Thanks, everyone. Anyone opposed to adopting the meeting 18 minutes with these changes, please say nay. Okay. Thanks, everybody. So meeting 18 minutes, we will make these changes and we will get these posted on CEO's website. All right, moving next to our residential model code discussion. So there were 3 proposals we did not get to at our last meeting. One is related to electric readiness, and then there are 2 related to solar readiness. So we'll first start with Adam and Will's proposal, then we'll move to Andrew's, and then we will move to Kevin's. As we move through today's meeting, I realize some of these proposals may require a bit more conversation, but our thinking is, our structure that we'd like to try to maintain is that 7-minute chunk of time per proposal. So that's a minute for a board member to present the proposal, around 5 minutes to discuss and ask questions, and then conduct the straw poll at the end. So I'll be keeping loose time over here, and I'll just flag for folks if we are starting to go way outside of our bounds for each proposal. So with that, Adam, I will pass it over to you for our first proposal for the day.
Thanks, Kim. And yeah, Will's running a little late at a cabinet meeting, so I'll be filling in for him on the CEO side until he gets here. But just for this proposal, it was flagged in public comment from one of our public commenters. And we've also reviewed the code language and agree that in the residential electric ready code language, unlike in commercial, where we made it pretty clear that the panel space, the panel capacity is actually required, the language, I think, I don't think that there was an intent by the Energy Code Board in the last process to exclude panel capacity necessary to meet future electric loads on the residential side. But we've heard from a couple folks that the interpretation of this language in section RE 302.3 was that we were only requiring the physical circuit breaker space, and not actually requiring the panel to have sufficient capacity to meet the need. And so this is really intended just to align the residential with what we had already done on commercial side, which is requiring the actual panel capacity to be there.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. So yeah, comments, questions from the board. Tim, I'll let you start us off.
Yeah, thank you. Question comes up, and I've dealt with this exact issue on our residential plan review since I've been enforcing this code, is when we see a potential requirement to provide the electric strip for backup heat, depending on the heat pump sizing, and if they're deleting the furnace entirely. What we've seen is the requirement to put up or make the electrical panel service bigger from a typical 200 amp up to a 300 amp. So just to keep that in mind for the board, or if there's any comments from any of the board members for that on the electrical side. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Carolyn?
Tim, are you seeing that for larger properties? Because generally, even with the 3 kW electric resistance, which would be kind of I know that there's a lot of oversizing going on, but I think 3 kW would be what would be typically recommended from manufacturers. We still see 200 amp being sufficient. So I was just curious what's triggering you up to 300 amp.
Yeah, we've been seeing that on the typical size townhomes, 2,500 square foot or so. And we've been asking to see electrical one line. So we are seeing that. So not on every one, but a vast majority. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Carolyn. Ron?
Yeah, I think there is a potential for this to cause electrical panels to go up in size. I'm not sure that's totally inappropriate. I mean, we are seeing a desire to push towards greater electrification across the board. And I think often these larger panels, while they do have a first cost, are going to be ultimately serving the homeowners well into the future. I think about my own house. It was designed with a 60 amp breaker for the main panel, and that caused a lot of problems for subsequent homeowners who are running right up into the edge of that. So I'm not sure if this pushes it over the edge or not from one breaker panel size to the next. But even if it does, I'm not sure that's the worst thing for the long-term health of the community.
Thanks, Ron. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I do vaguely remember these conversations way back when, and I don't feel like this decision was an oversight. I feel like it was intentional at the time. I don't know if anybody else recalls those conversations, but I think the reasoning behind it was that we didn't want to burden the homeowners or oversize things, electric capacity that was going to be unused, in the short term, that was going to take up too much of the allowed grid capacity if it wasn't going to be used. But I don't think this was an oversight. I thought it was on purpose, but maybe I was the only one. Thanks.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Adam, and then we'll go to Kristen.
was just going to respond. I think that I do recall there being discussions about whether or not to have a specific panel capacity or larger, like saying you must have a 200 amp or larger panel versus saying that there must be a panel that is sized to accommodate the future electric load. So Elizabeth, I don't know if that addresses anything there for you. But I do recall that element of it, but I don't necessarily think that there was necessarily an intent to say that you don't need sufficient electric panel capacity at all, because I would argue then you don't really have electric ready. I mean, if all you have is the wiring from the panel to the future sites of where electric equipment will be, I mean, obviously that's better than having to tear out walls and put in that electrical infrastructure. But I think if you don't have a panel that can meet it and you would have to do a panel upgrade when you electrify anyway, then we're not really making things electric ready.
And I feel like that was the discussion that we had, and the board decided this on purpose.
Okay.
But again, maybe that was just my interpretation.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Elizabeth. Kristen?
Yeah, without the adequate panel capacity, it's not electric ready. And I don't feel like we decided that on purpose. I thought it was in there. So I would agree and support CEO's proposal.
Thanks, Kristen. Tim?
Yeah, thanks. I do recall that discussion, and I don't think, well, first of all, in the future, if someone decided to go forward with electrification, part of our permit process, or any building department's permit process, I should say, for the most part, will be to do exactly what this is saying. Is at that point you verify that the capacity is there, and then that'll be part. I've got a couple of proposals that we'll be hearing on the commercial side, which are aligned with this, is that's part of the permit process. So to be electric ready and asking to equivalent electrical load on combustion, for electric equipment in 10 years or whatever that might be, we have no idea what that is. Technology is getting a lot better. Certainly, we'll probably be taking less load. So I'm going to be voting against this. I don't think you need this. It'll be taken care of through the permit process with a building permit. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Carolyn?
Yeah, I'm supportive of this clarification. I also recall the conversation we had, and we wanted to not prescribe the number of circuits and the exact circuit sizing, but I don't think that it was ever our intent not to ensure that the service capacity was appropriate to meet whatever they determine to be the appropriate electric ready configuration of the home. And just I think to Tim's point, on our side, like, we would look to make sure the service capacity is there. And so I think being clear in code that's what would happen as well. I support including the clarification, just to make it very transparent and upfront that we do expect service capacity to be adequate for whatever the future electrical configuration is assumed to be for that home.
Okay, thanks, Carolyn. All right, thanks, everyone. I'm not seeing any more hands, and so maybe with that, we can move to the straw poll on this proposal. So the question at hand is, does the board want to modify RE 302.3 to, with the language provided on the previous slide, to ensure sufficient electrical panel size is provided? So vote for A is yes, would like to modify. Vote for B is no, would not. And then a vote for C is to abstain. So if you would like to vote A to approve this change, please raise your hand. Okay, thanks, everybody. I see 9 hands in support of A. You can lower your hands. If you would like to vote no on this proposal, please raise your hand. Okay, thanks, guys. I see 4 no votes on this proposal. And if you'd like to abstain from voting, please raise your hand. Okay, 0 votes for abstain. All right, so that's 9 votes for option A, 4 for option B, and 0 for C. So that means this change passes, and we will integrate this into the next round of the model code draft. All right, so now we're going to move on to our two residential solar ready proposals. Yeah, Carolyn.
Yeah, I know, Kim, but you and Adam and I had a side exchange around gas lighting, outdoor lighting. And I just wanted to, what's fresh in my mind. I would propose that we could address that clarity with just the definition of combustion equipment to be clear that it's indoor or outdoor lights. It does include lighting in the definition. And I think just being transparent that it could be indoor or outdoor would be helpful to make sure that electric ready is being addressed. So just want to offer that one up while I was fresh.
Thanks, Carolyn. And yeah, Adam and I chatted a bit offline. I think with the proposals we have on the docket today, we were thinking that that could be brought forward as a proposal once we get the first draft out to you guys. So it is on Adam and I's radar, and we've flagged that to make sure that it gets talked about at a future meeting.
Yeah, I'm just putting it in the minutes because I won't remember.
Sounds good. All right, cool. So we have two proposals from board members on the residential solar ready provisions. So Andrew's is first, and then we will move to Kevin. So Andrew, I will pass it over to you for to share your proposal for the solar ready residential.
Thank you. If you could, please, I'm trying to recall at least the context in which I made this proposal, that I made this for the solar ready, that at the time the board was contemplating and still is to take out reference to the ERI with respect to on-site power.
Andrew, I think this proposal was actually in regards to part 3. I believe it's part 3. Let me find it in the model code. So we've got chapter 4 residential solar ready, and there was a part 3 in that which required a residential solar capacity. And so I believe your comment was that we should you were interested in striking the requirements around
capacity size, correct. That as more of us have moved towards a voluntary ERI and may move at some point to a code ERI, I didn't feel that builders should be tied to minimum capacity or power output with respect to solar, because it constrains us. Having a goal is feasible. Having for instance, in the California approach, their prior approach was more of a net zero electric before they moved to their current version. An approach like that led to something that sort of was a minimum capacity, but it never actually prescribed capacity. Hence, as this came up, I at least wanted to raise my hand that having a firm minimum doesn't serve the residential building community well. And if that is the intent, I don't know if any of us really completely understand what the effect is and how to deal with that effect. And if there's a beneficial effect that's above and beyond any ERI goal, why shouldn't a builder be permitted to offset that with any other action, which the board is sought to do? So at least that's my current position on this.
Okay.
And that may be enough for right now, Kim, until this gets flushed through.
Okay, so Andrew, just to clarify, are you seeking to, my understanding was that you were seeking to strike the part 4 solar capacity of our model code. Is that the proposal for the board?
That's the proposal, that until this may be a leftover that wasn't so clearly well defined as to what a minimum capacity should be. It's the current position that capacity should not be stated. Having something more of a soft objective or a hard objective is preferred over having a minimum capacity. And if a minimum capacity is prescribed, I think the building community should get the benefit of it if there is a benefit to offset having to do anything else. And I think the board's been against that, trying to take any offsetting benefit if there is a minimum.
Great, thanks, Andrew. So we'll do board questions and comments now. So Carolyn, I see your hand is up, so we'll go to you first.
I'll admit, I didn't actually follow the conversation. So I'm kind of, I'm a little bit lost, I think. Is the proposal here to strike the column that says energy rating index with OPP? Is that what we're talking about?
Kim, by chance, I don't know if you could pull up that language. Not my language, but my comment was in response to language that was put up in the survey.
Yes, this is the language, and apologies for the screen split. But this is the part 3 residential solar panel capacity. This is the language that the comment was in reference to. So the main electrical service panel shall have sufficient reserve space to allow installation of a dual pole circuit breaker for future solar electric installation. So Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe your comment in the survey came through on this.
Yes, the capacity, I believe others were making a stance or position for a minimum capacity, and I was just making a stance for not having a minimum capacity that isn't really addressed in this language currently.
You're opposing any amendments to this. Is that an accurate way to state that, Andrew?
Yes, yes.
Like if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Currently, yes.
Okay.
Until this gets further flushed through. I believe there were a couple comments to add a minimum requirement, hence I wanted to at least raise it. That including a minimum, I think, has unintended ripple effects that haven't been fully thought through.
Okay. Thanks, Andrew. So I guess then in this case, I don't think that there are currently any board proposals to change this part of the model code. Given that, I think, Andrew, we might be covered for your proposal and we could move on.
We can move on for now. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. All right, I'll move this back here. All righty. Okay, so I think the next solar ready proposal was from Kevin, and this was actually to include energy storage readiness as it relates to storage solar readiness. So considering integration of Appendix RD. So Kevin, I will turn it over to you, and for the Lotus team, if you guys don't mind dropping the link to Appendix RD in the chat, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. And this may be one from how long ago was that survey, and what did we really want to have in that? But I just have been glancing back and forth between the two. And I think when I made this comment in the survey, it was, we're saying that there has to be solar panel, like solar ready, roof space for solar panels to be put in place. So and it may have been from a public comment that it logically followed then that there would have to be room for the storage at least along with that. As I peeked through RD just now, though, I see that it actually is talking about implementing an entire ESS through there, which I think is going to be kind of cost prohibitive. And I feel it's a little bit like what Tim is saying about capacity, knowing how to string all these things together. So I might modify what was admittedly a pretty vague proposal to really just look at the space capacity for that rather than putting the entire system in place. Because I feel like if you have the solar ready space on the roof, then you should have the space within the building to be able to accommodate that storage component. And maybe it could just be a quick straw poll thumbs up. Does that sound like a good idea or not? I want to be mindful of time. And I recognize that incorporating all of RD is probably not the best fit for how the model code reads currently. But getting some space for those components still could be a good add.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I think maybe before we do a rough straw poll, we'd just love to hear some board questions or comments on this. So Kristen, I see your hand. I'll go to you.
Are you talking just like physical space, close to the electrical panel to allow for, say, like hanging a Tesla battery on the wall?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking down through the R3 RD 103.3.2. Space shall be reserved for the allow the future installation of a transfer switch. It's just kind of given some elbow room, I think, in the termination room for these. There is a panel board with backup load circuits under RD 103.3.3 as well. And I think that's where it goes a little heavy because you're putting in the entire panel board then, and I recognize that is going to be a legitimate cost add. So the thing with trying to take all of RD 103 is it's a fully loaded thing and there's real costs to that. And I feel like it's almost a parallel to our conversation previously about the panel space. I'm okay with the space. So I don't want to be buying a bunch of equipment as a mandate.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. So are you thinking it, just to make sure that I'm clear and the board is clear, from RD 103.3.2, that's the space, is it 103.3.1 and 3.2? Or just 103.3.2?
I think it's going to be 103.3.1 for that space, and then 3.2, RD 103.3.2 for the equipment space.
Okay.
Because Kim, I think RD 103.2 says that we'll have the full ESS, and I feel like that's asking too much.
Okay. Thanks, Kevin. Tim?
Yeah, thank you. Just from a permit standpoint, Broomfield, at least at the minimum, we've issued hundreds and hundreds or more of residential solar permits, which is a good thing over the past quite a few years. And it is extremely rare to have a battery backup system go with that. I couldn't tell you the exact percentage, but it's very rare. Primarily the input we get from the solar companies on that and the homeowners is that increased expense of both the system and potentially increasing the size of the panel. So just some permit historical reference.
Thanks for that, Tim.
Yeah, Carolyn.
Yeah, we're seeing that number creeping up towards 10% of solar projects going in with storage now, especially with some of the utility incentives that are out there. So just wanted to offer that kind of, shift in what we've been seeing in the Boulder region from some of the recent campaigns that have been going on. So I guess related to this though, I'm trying to decide how maybe there's an ask to better understand like what the incremental cost impact is to determine, I think if we want to put this into the base code, I for sure support obviously the appendix as a whole. And I think in some of our jurisdictions, there's opportunity to include it. I'm just trying to noodle on what the incremental effect really is going to be in terms of construction costs.
Thanks, Carolyn. Ron?
Just wanted to add my 2 cents that in Boulder County, at least, we've been seeing a pretty steady uptick in battery systems. And I would say they're not necessarily whole house battery systems, but we definitely are getting more and more battery systems. And I think it's a little higher, the numbers in places where the grid is a little less stable, not surprisingly, but there's definitely a correlation going on there.
Thanks, Ron. Kim?
I just wanted to chime in, Ron just kind of prepped me perfectly because I live in a very an area where it is very rural, mountain challenges of providing electrical system service. And without some sort of backup system, it is difficult to encourage or even require homeowners to go 100% electric because they could be without power for a long time. And I know that that's not necessarily our charge as a board, but I do think that if we're encouraging all electric ready, solar ready, and then a house doesn't have space to install a future energy storage system, then we're not setting that home up for success. I personally feel that way with my house. So hopefully that's helpful.
Thanks, Kim. I think you said that better than I did. Appreciate that. That's the gist.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Kim. Thanks, Kevin. Ron, and then I'll go Adam.
Yeah, just one other piece of this, which is that for many of the folks, especially in the mountain communities, the alternative in terms of cost that they're looking at is battery backup versus a propane system. So that's the trade-off they're looking at. And so if they can avoid the expense of installing a propane system, propane appliances, propane tanks, and all that, that's the trade-off. It's not battery or no battery. It's battery or propane as a backup.
Thanks, Ron. Adam.
I think we should also just be taking into account as Colorado's grid is becoming largely renewable by 2040, that a lot of the value of on-site renewable energy systems is also going to be the resilience that they provide, and that resilience only really comes with battery storage. And so I think we have to be realistic about the fact that if people are continuing to choose to utilize the solar ready infrastructure to install solar on their roof, that a lot of the value that they're going to get, and perhaps, you know, financial structures and incentives, is going to evolve in a way that will really value the resilience that battery backup provides. And so I agree that I think, you know, it's valuable to be adding at least the opportunity for storage. And I think something that really doesn't necessarily have a significant penalty by allowing extra space near the panel for that system.
Thanks, Adam. And Kristen.
Yeah, to illustrate Adam's point, like up where I am and in a lot of co-op territory, you can get an electric rate that is 3 times lower than a peak rate if you sign up for a different rate structure. And there is talk of making those rate structures required. So there's going to be a big economic incentive for those people who can use a battery to switch to battery power whenever they're on those high peak rates. Thanks.
Thanks, Kristen. All right, so I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to bring back our PowerPoint here. Oh, I can do it. Stay. And I adjusted our proposal here, and Kevin, just confirm with me once it loads that this looks good. Sorry, let me get my presenter mode out of here. Oh, my computer, there we go. Okay, here we go. So the poll in question would be, does the board want to include energy storage readiness requirements for space from sections RD 103.3.1 and RD 103.3.2 into the model electric and solar ready code? Kevin, am I capturing your proposal correctly there? Just confirm.
Yeah, and I'm always aware of the unintended consequences of not taking a whole section of code, so I don't see through what the problem in that is going to be, but that's the gist of it. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Kevin. And so there's a couple more hands. So Elizabeth, I'll go to you, and then Carolyn.
Yeah, sorry, could we just look at what those sections are again? Like, are we talking about physical space, or are we talking about what are we talking about? Thanks.
I think it's just the service capacity if you're just picking up those two, right?
Sorry, it's just the what did you say?
Or is it? I missed. Now you took your slide down. Which are you proposing?
This one and
3.3.1 and 3. Okay.
Okay, so hopefully you guys have had a moment to read those two sections now. Elizabeth, did you have, now that we've got it up, any thoughts?
Can we, my Googling fingers are not fast enough to look up what is section R330 of the IRC and section blah, blah, blah of the NFPA 70 actually say?
I might see if where are you, Hope, / Josh? If you guys have any insights or quick knowledge of what those two sections require.
And while we're at it, I just want to reiterate what my stance is on modifying this electric ready, solar ready code. The community is still just getting used to this. I really am not loving the idea of changing anything at this point, while the industry is still learning it, and this would be a pretty significant change from sizing of stuff and designing of homes, and while I'm very much in support of providing space for energy storage and stuff, I'm really against changing that code right now, just because it's a lot to ask.
Okay, Elizabeth.
But I also want to, let's see exactly what we're asking here. When we talk about interior, exterior space with dimensions and locations, we need to be really clear about what that is and how that would impact projects that are dealing with this right now.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Josh / Hope, I see your hand up, so I'm gonna pass it to you first. I feel like you might be able to answer.
So we just want to point out that section 330 starts to address the location and some of those building planning projects or considerations associated with it. So that's where you'll get into whether you locate it in a garage or outside, those kinds of considerations. So there's nothing special or unique about 330 or NFPA 70 there.
So what is the requirement then of RD 103.3.1? Like, what dimensions and locations would be required?
So that's when we start talking about having that same 3 feet that you see listed there in 103.3.2 is listed in 330.3.1. It talks about where the locations are, whether they're in detached garages, detached accessory dwellings, when they're attached. How do we have, very similar to when we talk about having, if you think about combustion-based equipment in garages, how we have them elevated so that we don't have impacts. Those kinds of considerations are in R330. We start talking about locations and ratings.
This seems like it's more than that. This seems like it's asking for physical space for a future battery, which are big. I mean, those things are like 3 feet by 5 feet if you're going to put them on the wall. So what kind of dimensions and space is being required by this future energy storage? I think there's got to be some numbers in there. This is not just a dimensional space for a transfer switch. I think this is dimensional space for a future battery, right? I mean, Kevin, is that what you're thinking here?
Yeah.
So I think we need to know what is that and what is the ask of people who are, in design right now. Is it achievable?
Yeah, and from my experiences, that's where, it's going to be based on how many wall units you need, right? Are you going to have 1 unit or 2 units, 3 units? What's that spacing, that 3 feet, separation, much like you would have if you installed especially depending on where you co-locate. You locate it near the panel. Is it away from the panel? Is it, those kind of design questions are going to have to be addressed by plan review staff.
So if I'm a designer or a contractor, how do I know what that is?
The manufacturer's installation instructions would tell you the spacing and the size of that unit and what kind of separation or impact protections would be needed for it.
I'm really not comfortable with that. I don't know what that means. I don't know how another contractor would know what that means.
Okay. Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm going to jump over to Tim.
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you. First of all, if jurisdictions adopting the 2024 IRC, that section will be in there, and it's pretty all-inclusive. So I think it'll take care of a lot of questions that have been brought up about what type, what size, locations, et cetera. And I will also want to point out that these two particular sections will only be applying to 1 and 2 family dwellings and townhome units. And if it was R2, then in the appendix, it kicks you over to Appendix CJ, which is totally different. So we're just discussing these two sections. And that's where I think Kevin was talking about is, possibly pulling out 2 just sections out of a whole appendix. If we went down the path to do these 2 sections, I think we'd need to clarify that is just for 1 and 2 family and townhomes. Thanks.
And I posted the link to that section of the IRC in the chat if you want to pull it up, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Carolyn. Kristen?
Just wanted to give some anecdotal evidence that I think this is feasible based on, my recent construction experience where we managed to get the panel, the required, 3 foot in front of it spacing, space for 1 Tesla battery, 8 kilowatt hours, and a 50-gallon water tank and a ceiling mounted ERV, all in a pretty tight space. So I'm optimistic that this isn't going to like double the size of utility closets or be a huge footprint.
Okay, thanks, Kristen. All right. Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this annotation here. Clear all my drawings. And I think transition us back to, where'd that PowerPoint go? And I think unless there are other final comments, what we can do is move to this straw poll. And I think, Kevin, confirming that you still like the way that this is written, I think we can vote on the question on the slide here and move, and then once you guys see it in the draft code, if it is approved, we can react and adjust as needed. But first I'll go to Kim and then Carolyn.
Just real quickly, I can completely appreciate Elizabeth's perspective of not wanting to change something that we've just recently adopted. And at the same time, if contractors and architects, and I know they're either coming up to speed on it or they haven't even started to look at it yet in my region, now's the time to catch things that we might have missed before or weren't part of what we were discussing or considering because we weren't looking at these appendices that are now available to us in the 2024 IECC. So that's just my perspective on the timing of updating or incorporating new requirements now.
Thanks, Kim. Carolyn?
Yeah, I wanted to note, Tim had made a comment in his comments around limiting this to single family and townhome structures, and we didn't really have any discussion for Kevin's response to that. And so I'm also just curious if making that limitation helps move this forward or not. So just wanted to name that as something that came up that I don't think we dispositioned.
Yeah, and I don't think it's necessarily adding a limitation. It's noting that our residential provisions of our electric and solar ready code only apply to single family and two family and townhomes. So if it was made in the residential side, it only applies to those categories. So it's not excluding R2. R2 is already in the commercial side.
Right.
Thank you. Does that work for you, Tim and Kevin?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, me too. Thanks. I keep getting mixed up, Adam, between the IECC and this code. So I apologize, but good point.
No, it's totally fair. I just wanted to make sure everyone was clear on that's why we're not excluding R2. It's just that R2 is already in commercial for our purposes.
Awesome. Elizabeth?
Yeah, thanks for the link there, Carolyn. As I'm reading through some of these things, the requirements for where the energy storage can be located only in garages, or if it's outside, it has to be at least 3 feet away from doors or windows, or enclosed closets that are non-combustible. There are going to be homes in design right now that cannot accommodate that. Think about a tiny home. Where are you going to put it? There is no place to put it. I think we need to allow for some exceptions where the design of the home simply doesn't have those spaces, and there are, like, if you've got a garage, sure, this is fine, this is easy, this is no problem, but not all homes are like that. And I think we just have to think about the enforceability of that, and somehow put in some kind of exception for those sorts of situations that we're just not even thinking about.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. And so perhaps what I might recommend right now, to make sure we can continue moving forward, is let's do a straw poll on the question on the slide. We will integrate that into the code language and give you guys a draft for you to review. And at that time, once you see how this is all working together, maybe that's when board members can bring forward exceptions that would be a good fit in this space. So if that's okay with folks, I think, I just want to make sure we can continue on with our meeting today. So yeah, Tim, I'll take your final thought comment here.
Real quick, just when I mentioned the 2024 IRC, that section in the IRC is in the 2021. I think that's when it got brought in. And then there were code changes for the 24. So from a permitting standpoint, I think my vote would be not to include these requirements in the solar ready portion, and that it'll be captured when someone does a permit, which will get through the 21 IRC or the 24, and then they'd have to comply with the R330. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Tim. All right, so to the straw poll on the slide, does the board want to include the energy storage requirements that we looked at on the screen together, sections RD 103.3.1 and RD 103.3.2 in the model code? So option A is yes, you would like to approve this proposal. Option B is no, you would not, and option C is abstain. So option A, those in favor of this proposal, please raise your hand. And again, remember, there'll be time to make changes later if desired. Okay, thanks everyone. I see 6 hands in support for option A. Option B, if you would not like to accept this proposal, please raise your hand. All right, I see 4 hands for option B. You guys can lower your hands. And then option C, if you'd like to abstain, please raise your hand. Okay, thanks everybody. So that is not a clear majority vote for this. And so I think, given that there was not a clear winner in that, we will not, Adam, I'm just looking at you, not accept and move along. Is that correct?
Not included.
Yes. Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Good discussion in any case. And we will continue on now to our model code. Excuse me, the chapter 1 change, and then we will shift from there into commercial. So quick brain shift. We're going to talk about the administrative chapter, and then we'll move into commercial for our model code. So this proposal came from Tim this week when we were going back and forth. And Tim, I will turn it over to you just to share what you're hoping to do.
Yeah, thank you. This came up just the end of last week. I was challenged by an architect. I never get challenged by architects, sorry, Kevin. But doing a plan review on it, and we'll be talking a little bit later on about commercial kitchens and requirements for electric ready. But architect came back and was trying to understand why they were going to have to, on a big kitchen, total restaurant remodel, why they would have to comply with the electric ready, solar ready, et cetera. And he pointed out that section 101.3 says just to prepare new buildings, and it doesn't say anything. And then, of course, in the various 3 separate sections scope, we put in there, adding major alterations and additions. So I'm proposing that we add the red language with some help from Adam over the weekend And I'd like to see not only the scope that existing buildings undergoing major renovations, and I'm not sure if even to put in and additions, one could argue that the addition is a new building, but just at least the alignment would be new buildings, existing buildings, and maybe and additions, which would start out of the gate with the intent.
So Tim, just clarifying, you would like us on this screen to add and additions after major renovation?
I think that might be valid.
Okay. I think it's fine. I think it's maybe ambiguous the way it's written, so it's
Yeah.
good. It's always good to be clear.
Well, we've been trading a lot of emails, Adam and Kim. I'm the guinea pig, and I'm trying to deal with how to explain how to, enforce this code. So I keep bringing some of this stuff up. So either way, if it's at least this or adding an addition, you could argue, well, that's a new building, but an addition is by definition not really a new building. So anyway, there you go.
Thanks, Tim. All right, Carolyn, what do you?
Yeah, I support the intent here. I think we need to offer some clarity, though. Major renovations is probably too subjective.
Well, Carolyn, major renovations is the language we use throughout the rest of the sections, and that was where we determined that local governments had to decide what constitutes a major renovation, so it's not a defined term in this code. And so I think if we were to try to be more specific here, it would throw everything else off.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Carolyn. Okay. Other hands, other questions, other thoughts?
And you're adding addition?
I did add addition. If board members, Tim, I think that's sort of where I heard you land with your proposal. So again, I think going back to Adam's comment, the reason we drafted major renovations is because that was the language that we used throughout the rest of the code that was to be defined by the jurisdiction. This would say that you still need to define major renovations and additions are being captured in the intent. So I could go, whatever board members think, if they like that link addition or not. Pun not intended. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I think this is good clarification because we have that language elsewhere. Like if you look at RE 301.1, which is where we kick off the residential electric ready, it says these provisions shall be applicable for all new buildings, major renovations, and additions.
Okay.
So I think this just adds some consistency.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay, so with that, I'm going to move to the straw poll and add that language back in that we changed on slide 19. Seeing no more hands, I think we could go ahead and straw poll this. So to add the language and existing buildings undergoing major renovations and additions to section 101.3. A vote A is yes to add this language, a vote B is no, would not like to add this language, and a vote C is to abstain. So votes, if board members would like to vote option A, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 12 votes for option A. Thank you, guys. You can lower your hands. Option B, board members who would like to vote for option B, please raise your hand. Okay, 0 votes for option B. And any board members that would like to abstain, please raise your hand. Okay, 0 votes for option C. So this change passes. Thanks, everybody. So we'll see how long I can stay in slide mode. Might have to jump back out for more edits soon, but for now we will move into the commercial electric ready proposals. So remember we have commercial electric ready proposals, commercial solar or EV ready proposals, and then commercial solar ready proposals. We organize these based on priority from the survey that we sent you guys. So we're starting with electric ready, we're moving to EV ready, and then we'll go to solar ready. Anything we don't get to, we will wrap up at the start of the next meeting. So we received 4.5-ish proposals for changes to the electric ready code. So the first 3 are from Tim. So Tim, I will be turning it over to you shortly to go through these one by one. And then there was a proposal from a number of board members to add clarifying sections from Appendix CH in the 2024 code into the model code. And so we will talk about that at the end of this session. Okay, brain shifts, commercial electric ready. Everybody who has the model code up, maybe just scroll right to that section so we can all be looking at it together as we roll through these. So Tim, I will turn it over to you and I'll go through the proposed language slides as you're talking.
All right, thanks, Kim. And just to point out again, these, my three proposals here, and I'm gonna have a proposal on the EV table are not, I know there's been concern from the board members last meeting, this meeting, that we're starting to change, propose changes to this before it's ever been really enforced. And, you know, as I've explained, I'm been enforcing this and I'm proposing some of these changes to help clarify how to do designs from the design community, and then also from an enforcement standpoint, how to do the plan reviews. So what I'm proposing for the number one is on the how much space is needed is to add language to align with what the last week or 2 weeks ago the board approved on the electric ready portion, is just to say that physical space occupied shall be permitted to count towards, and it was some good language that was added from my original. So this will just be to match and be in alignment with what the board already recommended for approval on the residential electric ready. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. And I just wanted to note that this actually shows up because we have two sections of the commercial electric ready code for buildings greater than 10,000 square feet and less than 10,000 square feet. So it would land in this section as well as in, so it'd be for buildings greater than 10,000 square feet as well as buildings less than 10,000 square feet. And it's the same language. Thanks, Tim. Questions, clarifying thoughts or comments from board members? Okay, I am not seeing any hands. So if it's true, we could maybe just go to our poll. I think the question at hand is does the board want to clarify the physical space requirements in those two sections? So CE 302.2 number 3 and CE 302.3.4. Vote for option A is yes to include the physical space requirements changes as proposed by Tim. A vote B is no to not accept those changes, and a vote C is to abstain. So board members would like to accept the changes proposed by Tim. Please raise your hand. Okay, thanks everybody. Oh, yeah, keep them up. I saw 11 hands. So 11 hands, I think, at the peak there. So 12 hands. Okay, great. You guys can lower your hands. Thanks for throwing those back up for me. If you would not like to approve this proposal, please raise your hand. All right, that's no votes for option B. And then if you'd like to abstain, please raise your hand. Okay, so that's your votes for option C. So thank you, Tim. That proposal has been accepted. And back to you.
All right, thank you. Proposal number 2. One of the issues that I've been coming up with is the section, what section are we in? CE 302.2.1, and adding where it requires an electrical receptacle or a junction box, and then it needs to be taken to where the electrical service. So one example was, I brought this up before, was an all-electric multifamily project with a gas-fired pool boiler, and where you were able to run that conduit over to the panel board. And so what I've done is allow them to take that conduit over to a potential future new service by the utility provider, because it's going to be so big, like 1 million BTU. So I am proposing, if you could scroll down a little bit, Kim.
I cannot scroll because it's on the screen, Tim, but I could try to zoom in if that would be helpful?
Because there's like missing the last sentence. It says, it is acceptable to install conduit to a location of a future transformer or future electrical panel with service size determined at the time of that future permit. So that's what the exception number 2 would be. And once again, I go back to a couple of the comments I've been making previously, is that will be taken care of through the permit to do that modification going to the all electric or an electric appliance. So clarifying that it's giving more flexibility to the building department, plan review staff, and the design team to come up with a solution. And that's going to be the same thing with, what I've done with EV ready, with the EV capable, but we'll talk about that at another time here.
Thanks, Tim. And confirming, can you see that exception language on the slide here? Can others see it? It's showing on my end, so I just want to make sure everyone can read it. Okay, Elizabeth, I saw you nod your head. Okay, and again, just to add, we have the exception language added here under CE 302.2.1.
There we go.
In CE 302.3.1 for buildings that are 10,000 square feet or greater. So capturing it in both sections, and it is the same language. Will.
I just wanted to make sure that I understand what this is an exception to. Is this an exception to number 2? So number 1 and number 3 would be required, or can you speak to that?
Yeah, let me just double check to make sure we put that in the right spot. Give me a moment.
Like you would still have to do the physical space.
Yeah, hang on. Let me look at it. The intent would be an exception to number 2.
Okay, thanks, Tim. And then let me go back to the previous slide. Would this then should this also be moved as an exception to?
Yes.
Number 2?
Yes. Thanks, Will.
Thanks, Will. Does that answer your question, Will, or did you have any follow-up thoughts?
No, I don't think so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Other thoughts or questions from the board? Brad.
One quick thought for inclusion. We did include something similar to this in the Fort Collins Code, and we added conduit with a pull string, if that might be helpful. Would like to hear from other members of the board if that would be a good add.
Thanks, Brad. Tim, any initial thoughts on that, since this was your proposal? And then I'd love to know if other folks have thoughts as well.
Yeah, I would be, I'd agree with that. Thanks.
Okay, and I did type that change. It is just taking a moment to load here. No, maybe it's not doing it. With pull string. Was that right, Brad?
Yes. Seeing it now. Yeah. Looks good.
Awesome. Then I will do. Okay. Awesome. All right. So I think with that clarification, I'm not going to mess with the formatting for the exception on the slide. I think what we'll just do is, if the board wants to approve this change, we can work with Hope and Josh and team offline to make sure that the exception is sitting in the right place for the intent that the board is voting on. So not seeing any other hands, comments, or questions. I think we could move to the straw poll here. So does the board want to allow an exception to allow for conduit to run to an empty panel or future transformer in the 2 sections we outlined on those slides? Option A is a vote yes to add the exception language. A vote B is no to not include that exception language, and a vote C is to abstain. So board members in support of this proposal, voting for option A, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 10 hands raised for option A. Thank you, guys. You can lower your hands. Board members opposed to this proposal, voting for option B, please raise your hand. All right, 0 votes for option B, and any board members that would like to abstain, please raise your hand. Okay, awesome. I see 1 board member abstain. Thanks, guys. So this proposal passes with the majority. All right, and Tim, back to you for the final proposal in this section.
All right, thank you. Let's see what I did here.
I'm sorry, let me just, there we go.
So this again is a proposal to add some language to give more flexibility for the design team to come forward to the building department when they do the permits to allow for alternative materials or methods to be able to size their panel capacity. And it all goes back to some of my previous comments of requiring a panel to be sized. We just talked about that a little bit ago, and trying to determine what size is required when we're doing electric ready doesn't make any sense to me, because you don't have any idea what that's going to be. So at that point, we can give more flexibility to the design team. That's the purpose of this proposed exception.
Thanks, Tim. So I'll give folks a moment to sit with this. Again, this shows up in the buildings greater than 10,000 square feet and less than 10,000 square feet. So we have it in section this, you'll see this tiny number change here, CE 302.2.2 and CE 302.3.2. Carolyn, I'll go to you.
Don't we already have an alternative means and methods clause that can apply in this case? I guess I'm not concerned about inviting centering it right here explicitly, given other alternative means and methods clauses in, I realize it's not in this section, but in the code more broadly.
Thanks, Carolyn.
I don't think there is any language in the administrative chapter, for example, that says anything about alternative means and methods.
Yeah, I agree. I can't find that.
I would also note that I think most jurisdictions replace our administrative chapter with theirs, but it might still be worth contemplating.
So there is an alternative means and methods statement in the ICC base code, the model code, and so I think like we've said, most jurisdictions have to adopt that as part of this. So I'm not sure it makes sense to call it out in this section. Maybe, in our administrative section, we want to put something in there that allows for overall flexibility like all the other code books have. One of the things I'll point out, though, is those sections are very specific that while you can approve an alternative means and methods, you can't do anything that reduces the stringency of the code. So you can't reduce the safety, you can't reduce the energy efficiency of the code by granting a modification, but you are allowed to modify the code. So I don't like the idea of putting it specifically in with this requirement, but I do like the idea of making sure we have it in the overall administrative provisions of the code.
I will also note too that the intent here was that these requirements are, as they currently live, are separate from the IECC. The intent is to merge them into our low energy and carbon code as like amendments to the IECC. So inherently they would gain the alternative means and methods language that the IECC already has.
Okay, thanks, Adam. That's, I think, a helpful clarification. Tim, and then we'll go Carolyn.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. That's a good point. I would be in support of relocating this exception into the administrative portion. I didn't even think about that, but then that would capture. And this currently is we're proposing changes to the current electric ready and solar ready code. So we're a couple of years away from like what Adam just pointed out is that it would be the low carbon is going to be incorporated into the 24 IECC with all those administrative chapters. So I would be supportive of relocating this, but I think it's important. And I know Hope pointed out just in the chat about in the waiver, but that's not in the main, administrative part. And for the record, Broomfield, I deleted the waiver portion for the cost impact, but makes no difference here or there. I'd be in support of that.
To be clear, just so that there's no ambiguity here, that these changes are only going into the low energy and carbon code. We are not updating the electric ready and solar ready code as it is currently published. Only the changes to this that will be integrated into the low energy and carbon code. That's all we're talking about here.
Oops, thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Carolyn?
Yeah, so for clarification, I think Ron offered the counter proposal with the more conventional alternative means and methods language. And Tim, it seemed like you were supportive of that. So rather than this language here, to make sure that within this we have the alternative means and methods language more broadly, that ensures that we aren't making the code less stringent.
Can I maybe offer, just Tim, and I get your opinion on this, as to maybe we could table this, because if we're going to be incorporating this into as amendments to the IECC instead of a standalone code as it currently exists, it will already be accounted for with the alternative means and methods approach in the IECC. So I'm wondering if potentially we could just table this now, and you could see how it lands in the IECC and see how that language would apply to it, and then revisit it if you're not comfortable with how that ends up.
Good point. I'd agree with that. Thanks.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Tim, and thanks, Adam. So this proposal will be tabled, but moving forward, the intent and understanding is that the alternative means and methods language will land in our low energy and carbon code. So, okay. With that, I'm going to pass us on to, and don't know if I need to keep going in slideshow mode, a proposal 4. So this came from Adam and Will, Brad and Jess. So we'll kind of go round robin. We'll give everybody a chance to share why they're interested in adding these 2 sections into the model code. And then I will flip to the language as folks are sharing their proposals. So Will, would you like to, or Adam? I'm not sure who's speaking on behalf.
I defer to Adam on this.
Sure. Yeah, I think the only purpose behind this proposal was to address specific equipment sizing guidelines that are in Appendix CH for electric readiness. I know that had been raised as a concern about not only from Tim, but the Energy Office has also been hearing concerns from other design professionals around the state about who are in jurisdictions that have implemented this, about how do we know necessarily what to be doing as far as sizing for future electric equipment. And water heating equipment, particularly in those larger commercial buildings. And so we felt that Appendix CH, and specifically the section CH 103.1.1.3, and I forget the number of the next section, but so this one applies to, the first one applies to space heating equipment, the second one applies to water heating equipment, that these sections potentially gave clearer guidance on sizing and how to plan for sizing for electric readiness. So that was the intent behind the proposal.
Thanks, Adam. Brad, maybe I'll go to you next to see if there's anything you'd like to add.
I have very little to add. Adam said it perfectly, but I will just add from a personal perspective. We did add some language into our current code for commercial, into our commercial code that was a little bit ambiguous, and we have had multiple questions from people designing about sizing of those circuits. So I think now that we have something in code, we have a formula, this equation, and a table that supports it. I think it's critical to include this.
Thanks, Brad. All right, and Jess, I don't believe is here today, so we will not get the benefit of her pitch for this proposal. But would open up the floor now to questions, comments from the board. So Carolyn, what do you?
Yeah, and I think was flagging this as well, so just wanted to offer.
Oh yeah,
my
please.
support.
I'd like to add some additional comments, Carolyn, please do.
Yeah, I don't need to add any additional comments. I think this was well articulated. I just wanted to name that when I was flagging this chapter, this is some of the content I was interested in seeing pulled into the our model code as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Carolyn. Okay. Questions, comments, thoughts from the board? Okay.
Not necessarily a comment, but also just to be really clear with folks as to what this would be doing if we incorporated this. Essentially, we have in the model code right now the pretty general language about must be sized to meet the load. This language would essentially replace that language. So it would make it more specific and replace the generic language that's in there now.
Thanks, Adam. Okay, one more look at the water heating sizing. All right, well, I'll give it maybe 20 more seconds, see if there are any other hands that get raised, and if not, we can move on to a straw poll. Okay, that was a slow count of 20 in my head, so I think that's good. I don't see any other hands, so I think what we'll do is move to the straw poll. So question at hand, does the board want to replace the electric infrastructure sizing requirements in part 2 of the commercial electric ready code with the electrical infrastructure sizing requirements in section C8, appendix CH 103.1.1.3 and CH 103.1.2.4? A vote for option A is yes to integrate that language. A vote for option B is no to not integrate that language. And then a vote for C is to abstain. So with that, I will ask board members in support of this proposal. Option A, please raise your hand. All right, I see 11 hands raised for option A. Thank you guys. You can lower your hands. Board members opposed to this proposal, option B, please raise your hand. All right, 0 votes for option B. And any board members wishing to abstain, please raise your hand. All right, 0 votes for option C. So this proposal passes. Thanks, everyone. And Carolyn, I did want to just circle back and make sure that those were the 2 pieces that you wanted to discuss and that we feel good about those being captured.
Yep, I'm good. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. So now we'll move into our commercial EV ready proposals. And so for this one, we've got 2 proposals from Tim and 2-ish proposals from Kevin. And so we will start with Tim, and I will pass it back over to you.
Thanks. I'm here again. Appreciate the time. This comes up again from a couple of projects that are in my plan review queue over the last several weeks. And I'm proposing to potentially reduce the requirement for non-R2 parking lots with 10 or less spaces to only have 1 EV ready as compared to the current table that says 2. And the reason for that is, one example I've got 2 oil change projects, standalone buildings. One has like 9 or 8 spaces, and then the other one has 11. And there's, like not even barely an office in the 9. So by the building code, it would require 1 van accessible parking space, which is essentially 2 spaces with the striped aisle. And then currently it would require the 2 EV ready spaces. And so in the future, if someone came in and took one of those EV ready spaces and converted that, or got a permit to do an EV installed, they have to convert that to a van accessible, ADA accessible space under the current building code. And so we have small parking lots that will get smaller with that. And I think the input I'm getting from the one Valvoline is, they could handle the one EV ready with the ADA space. And then, most people are rarely, going in and out, a couple of staff members. So that's my first proposal, is to change that down from 2 EV ready to 1 for those small parking lots.
Thank you, Tim. Carolyn, I'll go to you first. I see your hand up.
Yeah, I'm not sure I totally follow this, so maybe some clarifications for me, Tim. I mean, when you're building out the infrastructure, right, our assumption is that one dual-headed charger can serve 2 spaces. So then we're only running 1 conduit and pre-wiring for 1 dual head charging station to serve 2 spaces. Is your concern, though, that then they become out of compliance at a later date? Because, I mean, technically, the space is still served by the EV ready, even if it's converted to a ADA compliant space. Because again, it's just 1 single conduit serving 2 spaces.
That is true. I did not think of it that way, but the code does allow, the current code says you can do just the 1 conduit with the junction box for side by side. So that might not be as big an issue as I was thinking for potential.
And I don't know if Will wants to weigh in on this, but at least my experience has been, just personal experience with driving an EV, I've never not seen a dual ported charging station unless it's basically like a wall plug. And I don't know, Will, if you have any perspective on if that's common, but I don't think it's something we see really ever is non-dual ported stations.
Yeah, I would agree.
With that being said, I respectfully remove my request. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Tim.
No need to vote, right?
We will skip that straw poll and we will roll into your second proposal here. And as you're talking, I might just clean up a slide, given that we did not integrate the last one. So I'll pass it over to you, Tim, and apologies.
Okay. All right, thank you. So this is in alignment with what I started out with, the smaller parking lots, but with the bigger parking lots, which really essentially is 11 or bigger. And where once you hit that 11, then it kicks in those requirements for essentially up to 30% of the spaces. I think it says 2 EV ready or 2 EV installed, and then the 8%, 10%. So if you have these small parking lots, which I've got another oil change project that's got 11, now they have to comply not only with the IBC ADA ready, but in addition to EV installed. And it seems to me that with these small, and I don't know where I came up with the 15, but other than it would help out the 1 Valvoline I'm working on. But at some point you got to make that threshold. So I don't know if 15 is the right number or where that might be, but that was my thought process with this proposed change.
And Carolyn, jump in.
So is the concern, Tim, the requirement to have EVSE installed? Because with your example, the EV ready spaces are roughly the same. And the only difference is that you have to add 1 more, 2 spaces EV capable, but technically that's still just 1 conduit and service capacity, and then 1 additional conduit. So is it the EVSE part, or is it all of it for these smaller?
I think it's all of it. I mean, so in a parking lot with between 11 and 15, this would say you have to have 2 EV installed. 1 of them would be ADA. And then of course you have the ADA requirement out of the IBC. And these lots and sites are really small to be able to do these quick lube changes, or if you have a Scooters drive-through coffee, which only has like 3 or 4 parking spots, and doing that type of EV ready component for these small lots where people are maybe the only people there all day long are one or two employees. So, and I know the intent, what we've discussed about, but that's where I was coming up with this from just two projects I'm working on.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Carolyn.
If we do this, I think it's helpful to have the even number as the top of the size to make the math easier. So
I'm all for that.
So, and just to clarify too, I think because Tim, you withdrew your first proposal, we're not actually adding a separate category. We would just be increasing the number for the top end of the small lot. So it would increase from 10 to whatever number the board decides.
Correct. Yes. Thank you.
That sounds good. So basically I could just delete this row.
Yep.
And we could figure out 10, if this is the right number and if this is the right number for
I guess I'd have to go like 11 to 16 or since the.
Well, it would just be, yeah, I think you would just say, like, so say 15 is the right number. You'd say all commercial buildings except for RT occupancies with 15 or less parking spaces. And then their other one would say with 16 or more.
With
or with greater than 6. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. So this would be 15 and then this would be 15.
Correct.
Correct. Yeah, that would be the intent.
Okay.
Just a point of clarification, greater than 16 means 17. So I think you mean 16 or greater.
And 16 or greater. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay.
That would capture my intent. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Tim. Other questions, comments, thoughts from the board on this? Okay. So, we will, I'm just going to restructure this question really quick because we had captured it all. So does the board want to?
I would just maybe say something of increase the small commercial lot to 15 or something like that spaces. And adjust the large lot accordingly.
Thanks for coming up with that language.
Sorry, I'm just like, I was thinking it in my head, so I figured I'd say it out loud.
Yeah, I appreciate you. Carolyn.
Could you really quickly pull our table back up for a half a second?
Absolutely.
So are we comfortable with just 2 spaces then in a 16? I'm not as comfortable with that as only having 2 spaces be EV ready for a full 16 space lot. I guess the other thing I'm realizing is, Tim, okay, your example. I guess I would advocate maybe it's there is a secondary lot size where we're at least tracking the trying to do math here while I'm thinking about this.
Just another point of clarification there, Carolyn. If it's a 16 space lot, it's not affected. It would be the same as before. It's only if it's 15 or less.
Yeah, I'm sorry, going back to my earlier one, that when you make the top of even number, which I would advocate that is up to 16 spaces, not up to 15, just because the math works out a little bit better, I think. But I'm just trying to make sure that we would send up with the same numbers. As 15. So if we have 15% of spaces is when we go to larger lots, or 8%. So sorry, I'm trying to do math here.
You're great. No pressure.
Yeah, I just want to check that because 16 is not exactly, or 15 is not exactly a small lot. And so what we're saying, if we're increasing the size, but we're still only requiring 2 EV ready spaces. I want to make sure that that's something we're comfortable with. I might advocate for shifting to a percentage then, or something that gets it a little bit more robustly served. Because again, what then happens is that you only have one single circuit breaker available for future EV in that 15 space lot.
Just noting that the original intent was to be 20% of the spaces, and so if you did 20% instead, it's just 3 spaces instead of 2. But I think that kind of gets back to your point, Carolyn, about 3 spaces is really 4. So I mean, functionally. So I just want to throw that out there from
Yeah, thanks. That was the math I was
calculation
working on in my in my mind. Is that one.
Okay. Thanks, Carolyn and Adam. Will?
Yeah, I guess I have a similar thought to Carolyn's. I'm comfortable with not requiring the EVSE in those 11 to 15 space parking lots, but I don't like the idea of only requiring, the one conduit. Just as a reminder to folks, we are now up to almost 30% of new vehicle sales in Colorado are now EVs. And I think it would be a mistake to have these parking lots without at least, another EV capable, effectively 2 spaces. So I would be comfortable with something that said either, basically 4 EV ready or 2 EV ready and 2 EV capable in that 11 to 15.
I could support that one. Thank you.
Okay. Tim, I'm going to run it back to you since this was your original proposal. What are you thinking?
My suggestion would be doing that, still having this second, like 11 to 15, but I would propose a compromise on that, Will, to do an EV installed and then an EV ready for that smaller lot. I know people think maybe a 15 unit parking lot is not small, but when you look at a site plan with these small buildings, it is pretty small. And for like these types of small facilities, retail or quick lubes, they don't even have that many bays. Say for a quick lube, they've got 3 bays. So I mean, there's just not a lot of people parking there. Or if it's a short, like a liquor store or something where people are running in and out. So I'd propose that compromise.
Just bringing back the point though that 1 EV installed in space doesn't really make sense, because once you install the charger, there's 2 spaces, 2 ports. So you're not going to install the charger and only have 1 port most likely. So I think just bringing us back to that point of 1 space in these contexts really doesn't actually make sense, because functionally it's 2.
Okay. Carolyn, Will? I'll go with Carolyn first.
Yeah, so I supported, I think, Will's proposal, which is 0 EVSD installed spaces, 2 EV ready spaces, and 2 EV capable spaces. So that would be my proposed alternative.
Okay. Will?
What Carolyn said.
And just to humor me, can you go up to 16 for me?
So Tim, I will also offer, if you're not happy with this modification for your proposal, then we can certainly vote on your proposal and then this. Just to be clear, I don't want this to be seen as like steamrolling over your proposal, Tim. So if you're not happy with this outcome, please speak up and we'll make sure we vote on both.
No, it's not steamrolling. I was throwing this out and I knew we'd get a good debate. It's actually a better debate than I was expecting. Thank you. Great comments. But your comment, it's kind of interesting, your comment, Adam. So if you get into, let's say that current now commercial buildings greater than, what is it, greater? What's the current language? Greater than 10, I think is current language. And it says 2% of the spaces need to be EV ready. So right there, that's on say a small lot, 20 parking spaces, right? Which 2% of 20, It's like one space. And so you're going to get two. So, I mean, just automatically. So I think that all comes into how many are we requiring minimum versus what you're going to get. And then, then it keeps going on. So,
yeah. And I will say the other thing functionally too is, I mean, what you could do, because if you get an extra EVSE installed space, our language also says you can discount another space, right? So like if you only had to have one EVSE installed, but you end up with two, then you can have one fewer EV capable spaces than you were required to have, right?
Yeah.
Or something along those lines. Our code language already allows for that. So I guess to that point, Tim, it is possible to have those one required, just noting that in pretty much every case, it will be two. That's all I was trying to say is functionally, it will effectively be two. But that's a fair point that if you only require one, then it allows you to do an EVSE installed space instead of an EV capable space or something along those lines.
Okay. So Tim, I want to circle back to your original proposal. So I think the original sort of thing I would think we were landing at here, Tim, was this. So requiring the 2 EV ready spaces for 15 or less parking, 16 or greater bumps you into the 30%. This was the alternative proposed by Will and Carolyn. So Tim, where are you landing for your original proposal? Do you like the change from Will and Carolyn, or would you like to vote on a separate proposal?
I'd like to see what the board says on my original.
Okay.
Then I reserve the right to change my mind. No, sorry.
Absolutely. Okay. So then maybe what we will do first is vote on slide 51. Tim's original proposal here, and that's our current straw poll on 52. And then based on the results of this, we can go back and poll for the other proposal as well. So Tim?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just for clarification, that this is just in regards to the non-R2 parking lots. So I want to make sure that maybe add that into the straw poll vote language, just to make absolutely sure. Thanks.
I think you could just say after commercial, comma, non-R2, comma.
Thanks, Adam, for jumping in to say the language tonight. Okay, perfect. All right, everybody. So just one more quick look at the table we will be voting on. So this is, if you vote option A, you are accepting the changes as written in this table. If you vote option B, you are saying you don't like these changes. And if you vote option C, you're abstaining. So vote for option A, board members who would like to accept Tim's proposal to change the table, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 5 hands for option A. You can lower your hands. For option B, if folks would not like to accept this proposal, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 6 hands for option B. Thanks, guys. You can lower your hand. And I think there's 11 of us today. So if, but I'll just triple check if anyone would like to abstain from the vote, please raise your hand. Okay. So simple majority wins on this one, that this version of the table did not pass. Carolyn?
Yeah, so for the alternative, I did some math while we were voting. How about this option as the alternative to Tim's proposal? But for the EV ready spaces, let's do 20% of spaces, not less than 2.
And then Carolyn, would that be removing the EV capable spaces then?
Yeah, and it would be up to 15 total. So not 11 to 15, but 1 to 15. So 15 with 15 or less parking spaces, 20% of spaces, not less than 2.
I would just note that 20% of 11 can never be less than 2. So I think the not less than 2 is redundant language.
Yeah, no, because I was going from 1 to 15, not 11 to 15.
Yeah, she's
Combined.
super.
Sorry, I see what you're saying now. Sorry.
And then,
Gotcha.
yeah, so then we would add one more EV ready space as you get into 11 to 15.
Okay, so this would then come up here. We would strike this.
And I confirm that 15 is my number. That makes my math work the way I want it to. So thank you.
And then this would be deleted, and this would move to 16.
Well, I would say 16 or greater, but yes.
Or it would say greater than 15.
Or greater than 15.
Sorry, I
Yeah,
changed the
either way.
language there. Okay, yep. Quick review, Carolyn, is that correct? Okay. All right. So with this alternative, I'm just going to move this below the straw poll we just did. Copy this, and I'm just going to say, does the board want to, I'm just going to, how about, Adam, any magic language you want to give me for this one?
Just say modify the small commercial, comma, non R2 lot size
Sorry.
to be 20% electric or EV ready, not less than 2 spaces. Yeah. There you go.
Okay. All right. So this is the alternative to Tim. So we are bumping up the small lot size to 15 or less parking spaces, saying that the EV ready space count needs to be 20% of those spaces, not less than 2. And then the larger lot size bumps to 15 or with greater than 15, so 16 and above, with no change to the requirements. All right, so we'll vote option A is yes to approve this change, vote no is option B, and vote to abstain is option C. If board members would like to approve this proposed alternative, option A, please raise your hand. All right, I see 11 hands for option A. Thanks, you guys can lower your hands. And I believe that is all of our board, but we'll quickly go, are there any board members opposed to this proposal? Please raise your hand. All right, 0 votes for option B. And anyone who would like to abstain, please raise your hand. All right, that's 0 votes for option C. All right, thank you guys. So I just want to flag, we have one more proposal for EV ready and one more for solar ready. So I think we'll probably only get to some of the discussion on the final EV ready proposal from Kevin. And I will need to cut the conversation at around 11:25 just to wrap up, well, 11:28 to wrap up with you guys before we end today. So Kevin, I'll pass it to you. And if we don't wrap up this conversation today, we will kick off our next meeting with this continued conversation. So.
Yeah. And I do have, Kim, I have the comment and proposal side by side on a separate screen. So if I'm able to share, that might help, or maybe you have it all in there.
So this is the first level 1 charging proposal. And then I've got the second one on this slide. But I'm happy to pass it over to you, Kevin, if you'd like to. If you prefer.
2%. Maybe yes, and because I think it just would help people understand where I was coming from with this. If that's okay.
Adam, can you make Kevin a co-host to share?
Done.
All right, Kevin,
Thanks
take it
so
away.
much. Great. So hopefully that's the 2 side by side. It might be quite small, I'm aware. But these came up to me when I was just reviewing, I don't remember if it was survey or the model code review. One on the left screen is the comments from public input, and then on the right side is the proposals from public comment, proposal 6 and comment 7. And what they brought to our attention was that the voltage and amperage requirements that we have in the code currently kind of insist on a level 2 charger. And they were advocating for the benefit of having a level 1 charger available, particularly for multifamily R2 applications, under commercial code. I'm not going to reiterate the whole argument, but the gist is, I think if you have a large multifamily project, a couple 100 cars in the garage, you have these percentages that are going to be in there. That the need for a faster charge is not so much there, but the ability for somebody to plug in and leave overnight is more likely scenario for that type of use case. So I think the advocacy for this was twofold, and I want to advocate for one part clearly, and then have a discussion about the second part, because the one part is make it allowable to have an L1 charger available, and their rationale is the use case, the circuitry and panel board space is less, and it's a less expensive charger overall. And then I think the other part of it they threw in there was to then adjust the table accordingly, so that we don't get spun around the axle. I'd like to say I'm not proposing changing these, but allowing, and really what they said was you could do 2 L1s in place of 1 L2. And I don't know how that would work with our table. I spent some time looking at this and I couldn't figure out a quick way to do that. So the suggestion I came up with was really like in the different CV 502, like I don't know, 502.3, 502.4, 502.5, like all of those go through and say a certain kVA and then 40 amp, 28, 20, 240 volt. So my back and forth of with Kim over the weekend, I think, was could we add in that 120 volt possibility for an L1 space? And I think that's enough. So I might withdraw the notion, Kim, of changing the numbers even more. But I do think being able to say that we could do L1s for our 2 occupancies. And then if we felt like, okay, that decision makes us have to revisit the table, we've just seen how complicated that can be. So maybe we split these things up.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Adam, I saw your hand jump up, so I'll you.
Yeah, I think all I wanted to say is for those who are not familiar with level 1 or the different levels of EV charging, I just want to make sure everyone is on the same page in terms of, as Kevin, I think, noted, a level 1 charger is essentially your standard household outlet, 120 volt outlet that you can just plug your vehicle into. And that provides for most vehicles somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 miles of charge per hour, miles worth of charge per hour. So that over a standard 8 to 12 hour period, you could get anywhere from, 30 to 45, maybe 50 miles of charge in an overnight charge, just so that everybody is understanding of what level 1 is and how that affects EV charging. Just wanted to make sure that
thanks.
that's important.
Appreciate that, especially that I don't have an EV. I have an e-bike, but I know how that charges on its own. I think the other component they talked about was that I failed to mention between the different screens was, they were looking at it from an operations and management of a property point of view, that if somebody goes in and hits an L2 charger, but they leave it there all night, that's taking away that capacity from somebody else, unless they have the presence in mind and the decency to go and move their car once it's done charging. And Will's comment about 30% of new vehicles in Colorado being EVs now, that really kind of furthered my thought about this maybe being a good idea.
And just to be clear, I was not saying anything about the level 1 to try to dissuade anyone from the proposal.
Right.
I just wanted to be clear that everyone goes in knowing what level 1 charging is and kind of how that looks like in reality.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Ron, and then we'll go to Will.
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, I do have an EV, and when we have a long driving day, and we come home, let's say in the evening, and that battery is depleted, and we need the car the next morning, the overnight charge on a level 1 isn't sufficient to get you back up there. So it works fine for short things, but even the overnight charge, if you're running anywhere near the capacity of the battery and have that full range, you can't get there if you have 2 busy days in a row. And then the other thing I'll point out is that garages already have requirements within the building code for just standard 110 outlets. So requiring level 1 charging really isn't much of a requirement at all, because already we sort of have that built into the code already.
To be clear, Ron, this would only apply to the R2 occupancy, so not single family homes with garages, just making that clear.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Will?
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. one, sort of building on what Ron was just saying, I think that that's going to become actually a more significant problem over time because the size of battery packs is getting larger. And so the ability to recharge overnight with level 1, I think, will be getting more problematic rather than less problematic. And I would just note that in state facilities, we've in fact increasingly been seeing a need in some cases to do higher powered level 2 chargers in order to be able to, for instance, adequately charge vehicles like F-150 Lightnings. That said, I do think that there is a use case for level 1 charging and could be open to a version of this if there was some limits on it, but I would not want to be sort of moving into a place where you could satisfy all of the requirements through level 1 charging.
Thanks, Bo. Kevin, did you want to respond to that?
I think that makes sense. And I'm trying to remember if through all the different formulas and all of that, there was a threshold maybe in the proposal itself.
I think it's on the screen. I think it's 50%. It's on the screen right there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I support that. I think it's a good idea, Will.
Okay. Thanks, Kevin. Carolyn?
Thanks. And just so I understand the proposal, so for half of the non-EVSE spaces, you could substitute for level 1 charging at a 2-to-1 ratio. So you'd need, so let's say you needed 20 EV ready spaces, you'd have to do 40 level 1 spaces. Is that the proposal?
I think that could be part of it, Carolyn. I sort of wanted to separate the ability to do level 1 in addition to level 2 before changing the numbers first, because I think the two may be I think it might be different discussions, so we might have a hard time coming to a resolution on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say generally I can support this idea of some portion of the spaces. I think 50% sounds fine as long as it's resulting in double the number of spaces that are being served.
Yeah, and from a cost point of view, it might be that's actually more appealing, and it's, it does provide more spaces. I wasn't aware, so thank you for the context about, the long drive scenario, Ron. If somebody's, commuting 50 miles a day and they're regularly using that, or they're coming down from the mountains or what have you. So appreciate that context.
So just to make sure that I'm clear, so it sounds like we are maybe first want to straw poll with the board to around the intent to allow for a level 1 charger to meet some portion of the requirements, and then maybe there's a second discussion that we kick off next meeting with around what that number and requirement is.
I'd be okay with that. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, I guess, or discussion items or thoughts from the board before we move to a straw poll? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. So I think maybe the straw poll as it's worded is kind of capturing that intent. So does the board want to allow for integrate level 1 EV charging as an option for multifamily residential in the model electric and solar ready code? And if this is approved by the board, we would subsequently have a conversation about what that limit might be or how that would be integrated.
Yep, I'm cool with that as the way we present the question. Thanks, Kim.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. All right, so let's roll ahead with this straw poll. So a vote yes here is to allow for level 1 EV charging as an option in R2 multifamily residential. A vote no is to not allow for that, and a vote for C is to abstain. So board members in support of this intent, details to be ironed out later. Option A, raise your hand. Slowly rolling in. Okay, I see 10 hands raised in support of option A. Thank you, guys. You can lower your hands. Option B, to not accept this proposal, please raise your hand. All right, I see no votes for option B, and if you would like to abstain, please raise your hand. Okay, I have one abstain. So that's 10 in support of this proposal. So what Adam and I can do next time is kind of design, and Kevin will probably be emailing you offline to figure out how we want to structure this for board discussion at our next meeting. All right, awesome. Well, great work today, everybody. We're 4 minutes from wrapping up, so I'll just let you guys know there is one commercial solar ready proposal we did not get to, as well as wrapping up the EV ready proposal. So we will get to that at our next meeting and remind everybody to look at that ahead of our next meeting. So I'll just jump our next step. So this is a really tight turnaround with Energy Code Board meetings. We have our next meeting next Thursday because we wanted to squeeze one in before the Thanksgiving week. So just everybody, it's on your calendars. I know you know that, but really, really important for our next meeting is that we're going to be discussing the commercial code proposals submitted by the board on our first commercial draft. We will have those prepared and sent to you all today to start looking at. And I think the really big thing, as you guys recall from last time, is that we really ask you all in advance of the meeting to go through each proposal and get a good sense of how you would like to vote, or if you would need more discussion for that proposal in order to know how to vote. Rationale was included for all of the commercial code proposals, so you'll have that to leverage as well as you're reviewing. So meetings next Thursday, please take time between now and then to look at the commercial code proposals, and we'll get those out to you guys today. In addition, between now and next Thursday, we'll have you guys, take a look at the meeting notes from this meeting. We'll try to get those out by Thursday of this week, so you have enough time to look at those before our meeting next week. And then the last thing, so sorry, there's kind of a stacking of to-dos here, is that we will be sending you the residential code draft today. You all have until December 2nd at 8 a.m. to get us your comments on the residential code draft. So that's the one that's got the longer lead time on it. Yeah, you'll be seeing some emails from me this week. So I'll try to distinguish. One email will have the residential code, one will have the commercial code proposals. And so you guys, it will hopefully be clear to keep in mind. And if you have any questions at all about any of this, always reach out to me in between meetings. Happy to answer those. The other thing I wanted to note is that for the commercial code specifically, there were elements of C407 that did not fully get flushed out because our timeline was too short before we sent you the code proposals. So I know Adam is working through final changes on the commercial code for C407 that we will send you later. They won't be discussed at our next meeting next week. But since we have two meetings after next week to kind of wrap up our code discussions, we'll be carving out some time for that later. So not to add a layer of confusion, but just to note that there will be a couple of additional final code proposals on the commercial side coming to you all that just didn't make it in this first round. So with that, I think that's all I have for you guys. I'd say thank you guys so much for the really great discussion and really productive meeting today. I really appreciate it. And I hope you all have a great end to your week. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.